Okay, well, welcome back. Really glad that you're here. Great weather. Well, I wasn't sure if there was a place you all wanted to start. There's always these, I think, some really thoughtful questions.
I was gonna ask you, but I have to remember why I was having a hard time understanding 10 through 13. Um,
This part about being fools for Christ.
yeah, I guess, and I just, I was doing great, and then all of a sudden I was like, I don't understand. But you need to understand, I'm not.
You're fine. No, actually, I think this is kind of where he tries to differentiate in the workbook between two roles of the under rower, like the galley slave, that's like the motor to the boat, and then basically the shot caller or the navigator on top. And it seems like if he's right about that, then what's maybe happening here is that like they consider Paul to be a lesser servant because he's doing a different role than they are. And like I guess it's pretty easy to say, I mean, think about, like, we do this too in corporations, right? Like in general, the CEO gets paid about as much as everybody who works underneath them combined, right?
Right.
And so, like, I'm the CEO, I'm the director. Yeah, fine, except you'd be nothing without the people underneath you doing the work, right? And so I think Paul's like trying to say, like, hey, I may not be acting like CEO. I may have just been quietly going about work, and that's not like less valid. Or, hey, like, I don't know. I think the questions even ask us about these sort of roles that people have in churches. Like, there are people who you actually never know do a thing, but they do a lot of things, and they like really want it that way. And then there's people who do a couple of things, and boy, everybody knows they do a couple of things. And that's not necessarily bad. It just is like part of personality based or how people understand service. And so maybe this is Paul saying, like, hey, just because like we present our service differently, it doesn't mean that the service is lesser. And like, hey, we look foolish and we look petty because we're going about like essentially poor, right? Any money we make, we're reinvesting in the enterprise. And so that may seem foolish, but that's our service. There seems to be like some kind of, I mean, one of the Corinthian problems seems to be like rank and file, like who's got more gifts than somebody else, which gifts are more valuable, what kind of servants matter the most.
Okay, question. And it's on page 50, and it says, rather it is about self-giving generosity, mutual subordination. In other words, the path of Jesus' suffering servanthood and death on the cross is not accidental. It is the wisdom of God and the power of God for our sanctification and redemption.
Well, I mean, I think the first sentence to that paragraph may be what the author has in mind of like, hey, a lot of times, again, you look at the master as being greater than the servant.
Right.
And like Dr. King said, anybody can be great because anybody can serve. So that's kind of upending how we normally look at social rank.
Right.
The great one is the servant, not the one who commands the servants. It's kind of, and I think that's probably what's happening in here too, right? And just to, so it's like, to be fair, I'm not sure that like everybody needs to be one type of servant, as if there's only two, but like all the time, right? Because you do need people who are like, hey, we'd be better organized if we put our efforts here instead of, you need directors, you do,
Right.
but you know, like being a director isn't better, it's just a different role. We get in trouble a lot as clergy because, like, especially 50 years ago, people would say, oh, Father knows best, right? I mean, what do we really know? What do we really know? We have a particular role, and sometimes because we're identifiable or because we wear a particular uniform or a garment, like, oh, you must be better, or you must be a, you know, some sort of greater servant, but it's just a different kind of servitude. If we do it right, hopefully. I mean, I don't know if that's really changed. Like I've been in a meeting before and people were talking about ideas and somebody said, well, let's hear what the Father has to say. And I was looking around for who they were talking about, right? Because that felt really the Father. Like that seemed really strange, right? As if like I was going to like somehow speak out for God directly and just put all that to rest, you know? I mean, I got my own ideas and they're as wrong as anybody else's are, you know?
Okay, so how do we? I mean, we talk about the servants and I mean, I get the literature. I mean, I get it. But if you take it into day-to-day life,
Mm.
I should say day-to-day life at church.
Mhm.
How do you get everybody to work together that way? Because you do have personality. And you do have people that whether they mean to or not,
Yeah.
and I do it too, judge without meaning to judge, and people judge. How do you know?
I mean, you know, I think this is really great question. And like, I don't know if you've ever seen that like kind of famous tattoo, only God can judge me. And that comes right out of here.
Right.
And it's sort of like, well, the local magistrate can also judge you if you commit a crime, right? Like, right. But clearly what Paul's trying to say is, I think, is like, you know, you look at what somebody does and you don't really even know why they did what they did or what they're thinking. We usually like give them the worst interpretation. Like we talked about last week with the whole speeding thing, right? Like, hey, like you're speeding, it's because you're a jerk, but like maybe you're trying to make a medical appointment. That's really crucial, right? So like we just have like a very limited view of judgment because we never have somebody's intentions. Look, a lot of times, even like in a work environment, if somebody comes in late, it's like, oh, you're always coming in late. It's because you don't care, or it's because we do this sort of thing.
Right.
I mean, like you have no idea what their motive is or their reality is for coming in at 9:37 instead of 9:30, right? So like I this is not the way I grew up. I grew up like doing a lot of judgment. And I read this quote, it's like sort of interesting, that says the highest form of human intelligence is to observe without judging. So you might say, I noticed you came in the door at 9:37 instead of you're late. Like those are really different things. One is an observation, it's verifiable. The other is late according to who, according to what, right? Or you don't care about your job. Well, how do you know if somebody doesn't care about their job? What you saw is they didn't do it to your satisfaction, but that doesn't mean they don't care. So I wonder if that isn't Paul trying to say, look, like our frame of reference is often pretty misguided.
Well, right. And I mean, you think about the structure of the day-to-day business office. And, you know, you have mission statement and goals and meeting your quota and and you've got all that going. So judgment is flying all over the place. And I don't know how I mean, it'd be great if you could just write that in, take judgment off the table, but that's just hard.
Yeah, it is hard. And I think what's interesting is Paul even says, I don't even judge myself. I mean, that'd be nice. I judge myself all the time, right? And I think that's actually something he's inviting to. Like, usually we're our own harshest critic. And that I think Paul's actually getting a little bit vulnerable and saying, look, like my own standard of judgment is so skewed and I suffer from it. And actually that's what's creating rifts in your community and rifts in our relationship is you're going to judgment instead of observation and curiosity and like questions, right? So like if you had an employee that came in at 9:37 and you said you're late all the time, it's because you're lazy, like what's the remedy for that situation? Well, I guess you could fire them. On the other hand, if you said, look, I've observed you this week, 9:36, 9:38, 9:37, and look, I think you know the expectations to be here at 9:30, so like help me understand what's going on. And help me understand if you mean it instead of explain yourself, like can open up a new possibility. But even though we all know that, we rarely do it.
Well, we forget the compassion.
Because
we really can accomplish a lot more than attacking or being forceful in your endeavor, instead of saying, is there something, do you have an issue that is causing a problem? Because if you do, let's talk and figure out a way to solve it. But I think a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know the type of the homes you were raised in, but like if my parents told me these are the expectations and I didn't do them, it would be, well, you didn't do that because you don't respect me. Just like, actually, I wasn't thinking about you at all. Right? Well, that's because you don't respect me. Like, no, it's because I wasn't thinking about you at all. Right. And so, like, I think we've internalized, like, oh, if somebody doesn't meet our expectations, they're not respecting us. But this is when we start imputing like motive, and you didn't meet my need, and therefore there was intent. Right. Instead of like, you probably weren't thinking about me at all. Just like I don't often think about the consequences of my actions for other people. I'm usually just trying to get through the day. And like at a surface level, okay. And now we've got like apparently some divisiveness happening in the community. And maybe Paul's not as eloquent of a speaker as other people are, or maybe Paul's not as well dressed as other people are, right? And so now there's like judgment with motive being cast on him. And it's an interesting problem, right? Because like I went to college in order to judge better than I did, right? Like the point of education is to make judgments, I think, or to conduct analysis.
Right.
I think maybe though sometimes, and I'm still trying to work this out in my head, like I don't know if Paul means don't judge things as much as he means maybe don't condemn. Right? Because like analysis seems critical in the Western mind, like looking at variables and like, hey, what's happening and how can I like manipulate the variables to get better outcomes tomorrow? Like that's kind of the crux of why we go to school, right? Like we want our kids to be thoughtful thinkers, and that means having good data, right? Having good observations, and then like making good forecasts and models. So
which requires some judgment in it.
It seems like it requires some judgment to look at your financial records and judge this isn't working, right? Like that's good. The problem maybe is when we step outside of like analysis and we start imputing motive and character and dignity. Or you don't serve like I do and yours isn't as good.
That makes more sense. The condemnation makes more sense than the judgment.
And like I've raised kids, not that I've done well by all means, but there was a certain, the first one, bless his heart, he taught me a lot about myself I didn't want to learn. But like there comes a point sometimes with a kid where you say, I've been thinking that you won't do a thing, and maybe it's just that you can't do that thing. And that really changes my response. If I think somebody won't do it, like they've chosen not to, but sometimes they can't do it. Like it's
Right.
not in them to do it. And that means I need to do something different.
Well, it sounds like what's not being said in a lot of these cases is assumptions.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And I would say like that it's really hard. Like we're kind of hardwired our brain to compare. And comparison's great, except when you start to like attach value and dignity to comparison.
I've got a boss that is very non-judgmental. It's always awesome to see how he says things. Because I think, wow, and it just kind of blows me away that, I wouldn't have thought to say it that way, because I would have had the more judgmental. And so it's really nice to see. And one of the things I like is observing people that communicate well. And I don't know why it excites me so much to see people communicating well.
Because you don't see it very often.
Well, I would
Maybe
say,
that's it, because
yeah.
that's our biggest problem at work is lack of communication.
well, and lack of healthy communication is a real challenge, right? So like, again, just
Yes.
being around kids, if a child draws a picture of a thing and you know what it is, it's a good picture because I know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So like good drawing is an evaluation and you don't even have to observe what they did to evaluate it. Or I have a daughter and I also have a son. And I notice when people meet my kids that when they were 6, what they would say, the girl, they would say, "You're so cute. You're so pretty. You have such nice hair." They didn't say that to my son.
No, he was
Aw.
smart, I bet, and athletic and things like that.
And so like we do that stuff, right? And it's totally subconscious. How many times do you talk to somebody at work or even somebody you met and you said, "You should do this"? You should. Really? Should I? Like, you seem to know me really well, right? I mean, I could do that, but should I? In like being aware of how judgmental our own language is, it's tough to look in the mirror.
Because we were really raised to use those comparative words. And they just, well,
Yeah.
without meaning that you're not comparing. You really, in your mind, are not. You're just trying to say the nice thing or the appropriate thing. And yet, if you look deep, it is kind of comparative.
And metrics are great. And then like I work in an industry, like what are the metrics? Well, every year I have to turn in like how many pledges there are and the total amount of pledges and what the average Sunday attendance is. Like those are the numbers I turn in. What I don't turn in are narratives about like, hey, somebody had a psychological breakdown and the community really took care of them and their kids. Like, why? Because you can't track that as data. Like that's an anecdote. What would I rather tell you on a Sunday morning? The anecdote, because it's compelling. The numbers are, but like we all get stuck in this, and it's one thing to say we've got these metrics, but then like I think the easy leap that happens is the valuation of the metrics. Oh, your church isn't growing because you're not doing something right. Or you don't have as many pledges. Like you must not have had a good stewardship campaign, or you must not have had a good sermon series, or you like we look for reasons that have to do with valuation. And I mean, I think that's probably natural. And at a certain point, right? Like we got to do the best we can with what we have. But I guess there comes a point where we shade it so dark that we ended up with like divisions in the community.
Seems like people have the answer, the pat answer, without finding out what's really going on.
Well, I think part of it, honestly, is like to find out what's really going on, we'd have to take time which nobody seems to have enough of, me included, and I know better, and I still don't have time. And then like beyond time, it's the effort to like, you didn't do it the way I do it, which means you're silly, because like clearly I'm doing it the better way. So I have to like try to enter your world and figure out why you're making such like, innocuous decisions. Like that takes a lot of time to enter somebody's sort of life space. It's not really efficient, actually. And maybe that's why Paul is why these people are fools and why they're impoverished, because they're not efficient. They don't use their time to maximize their profits. They use their time to maximize relationships. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. Not like it's an either or,
Yeah, but that's why we're studying this, and that's why they're talking about Paul and his attempt to work on the community, because there's so many issues. It's the soap opera of the day, I mean, everybody's battling with everybody, and everybody has their own intentions and their own objectives, instead of looking at it from a whole.
Well, and like, if you didn't mind me being political for a second, there's this like famous story about Gandhi when he was the prime minister in India, and like on Monday he had position A, and like 2 weeks later he changed position A to position B, and somebody said, look, you've contradicted yourself. 2 weeks ago you were saying A and now you're saying B. And Gandhi's reply is, well, because I've learned something since then. No, you'd never hear a congressperson say that.
I know.
You're against the war in Iraq, but you voted for it. Well, I didn't really vote for it. We didn't know, like, your name's on the vote, like you did. Yeah, but it instead of like, yeah, at the time that seemed like the best thing to do, and I don't agree with my vote anymore, but I can't change history. Somehow that seems weak to us.
Right, telling the truth or coming to.
Or saying I learned something.
Telling the truth that you changed your mind because of new information.
I don't know if it's a male thing, but like I was wrong is something you rarely hear men say. And I know also it's kind of looking at what Paul stated to them. A lot of it seems to be just like, it's way easier to play God than to play the role that God assigns. This is good, this is bad, this is where this stops. And he's like, well, it's not your job to judge me, but it's easier. And I've been noticing this with everything going on in the news overseas. It's a lot easier to like just get angry and blame someone than to actually do anything productive or to have compassion. Like I've been really struggling with judgment this week. And it's like, you're talking about, it's like, okay, there's one point of realizing, okay, judgment's bad, but then what's the actual practice of, trying to remove that? We can try to meditate, we can try to do this, but for me, it just looks like a lot of it's just like playing God is kind of what Paul's calling out.
And interestingly enough, he's doing it himself a little
Yeah.
bit, right? He's kind of talking out both sides of his mouth, right? Because he ends up writing right after that passage, I'm not writing this to shame you. Really?
It sounded like.
I'm not writing this to shame you, but to warn you. And maybe that's authentic. Maybe that's authentic.
I'm discerning.
Yeah. And actually, like, I mean, there probably is some real sticky middle ground, like calling somebody out without calling them to the carpet is like, that can be really healthy. Like accountability is really, it's healthy, right? It's not healthy to say like, well, you do you and I'll do me. And okay, like I see you drinking your life away and I see you've squandered your life savings and you do you, right? Like friends sometimes say like, hey, I'm concerned about you, right? Like I'm just like, this is new and you don't seem to be yourself. And like, that can be really lovely when people do that. And we all know too, like when friends have done that to us in an unfriendly way. I don't even know if we know it mentally, like somehow there's something in our gut that says like, this is phony or this is authentic.
Well, then there's people that just have that view. I mean, I'm going to say something that I probably shouldn't. But my mother had a toast. Don't hate her, she's really, was a wonderful person. And it was, here's to you, here's to me. If we ever disagree, to hell with you, and here's to me. She was, yeah, piece of work. But I mean, that was her motto all her life. And I think there are people that have that. That's just them. She was a great teacher. She did all, had wonderful friends, but that was her. And I know a lot of people that have that same way of living, you know?
And there's a certain point, right, where, it's really easy for people to throw criticism from the cheap seats because they're not invested in your life.
Right.
And how worth listening to is that? I mean, you have to discern that, but it shouldn't own you, right? Like there's people who are invested, whose opinion of you matters. And my Brene Brown training says you can write their names on a 1 inch by 1 inch piece of paper, which means there's like 4. And like, that's it. And if you got more than 4, you got too many masters. So yes and no, right? Like it's got to be a both and. But I think that's maybe where it's good to remember the letter, like the guy's invested in the community. He's not like talking about a church across the street he's never even been to. Like this is a place he was instrumental in starting and forming and raising up. And so really maybe he is trying to warn them and not shame them. And I think like our language just doesn't work well to say, I mean, I'm going to be honest, like there's a lot of spiritualities that have been damaging for me, and I do call them out, not usually by individuals' names, but I'll say the church that raised me taught me this, and that was very harmful. And I do struggle with colleagues. It's one thing if you're Southern Baptist, because I get it, like you've got different kind of core convictions, but I struggle with Episcopal clergy colleagues that are not LGBTQ affirming. Like I struggle with that because like that's the national church. Like I thought we all knew that. So in some ways that's hard for me, and how not to be judgmental, I'm struggling with, because I think they're wrong. I do. I think they're wrong. And I know they think I'm wrong. I know they think that. Otherwise, we would all be affirming. And we're not. And how do we handle it? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It doesn't have to make or break our relationships, but I also know that's a subject I'm not talking about you with, because I don't want to be converted to your point of view. I came from it and I left it behind. And you probably don't want to be converted to mine. So maybe we don't talk about it. I don't know. And I'm not going to say their ministry's terrible because they're not open and affirming. Like in some ways I want to, because like, how can you not do that? Like my thinking is that's harmful to people in your care. Even if you don't know they're LGBTQ, like the likelihood is they are, or someone in their family is, and your lack of openness is not going to be caring. So it is hard. Like that's hard.
How do you get over that without having a conversation?
Well, I mean, I've honestly, like, to me, a conversation means I'm willing to listen, and you're also willing to listen to me. And so I don't think there's a lot of conversation that happens on hot button issues, because most people just want to hear themselves talk and they don't want to hear something different. There are many issues that's true for me. I've already revealed, like somebody telling me arguments like why God hates gay people, I'm not willing to listen to that. And I could be wrong that I know all of their arguments. I think I do. I think I do. But even if they came up with a new clever one about God hating people because of their sexual orientation, I'm not going to be convinced. So that's a conversation I don't need to have. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does.
It doesn't, it's like for me, a couple of times now I've been involved because of Daughters of the King on the provincial level, and we're all trying to figure out Israel, Hamas, and everything that's going on over there. So
Yeah.
how about we get involved in these conversations? It's really hard for me, I guess I have Jewish relationships, I was raised Catholic, now I'm Episcopal, so I have, and I'm a mutt, I'm just a Heinz 57, everything, so it's hard for me to just hate anyone. And so when they say, so let's talk about it, it's really hard to talk about it because I think really both sides are wrong and you're only creating more trouble. But as I was reading about Paul, I didn't tell Shop. Paul reminds me so much of my mother because he just does so many things the way my mother raised me. It's like, oh my God, is that Amalia? And I just keep, Robert said, oh, you were tossing and turning all night. I'm like, yeah, because my mother is in my Bible study. And, it's just really hard because I just feel like the condemnation, the accusations, and our language, and English wasn't my first language, but our language is just, it creates a lot of problems. And sometimes the way you say something or don't say something gets interpreted and like, oh, shouldn't have gone there, but it's really hard. But I'm enjoying this Bible.
Oh, thank you. But I think you brought up something really great, right? Which is this conflict that's happening in the Middle East, right? And like, I think it is really easy from afar, because we don't live there. It's really easy for us to look at the news we're presented and make quick decisions about what we see. Now, I'm not saying that the news is like intentionally trying to bias our decision, but obviously it's a point of view. And is there another point of view? And if we wanted different points of view, how would we get them? And it is an interesting thing, right, to see people make decisions about this from 3,000 miles away, right, without any kind of experience about what it's like to live there on either side of that border fence. It is very big and very real.
And I remember us being there and saying, it's not that big of a piece of land and it's so scary. The other day, Ellington Field had those, forget what they call it. I don't know. But they had those fights, like the
air
dog
show.
fights,
Air
show. And there were like these boom, boom, booms, and it was really scary. I had to call Sean and say, something going on at Ellington right now where they're doing that bomb thing. Because then I started thinking, there's people now living that horror, and it's not a bomb show.
That's exactly what I.
They're living that, and I'm glad that I'm not there or have not ever had to live there,
Yeah.
but there's people that are living that and may really be, when the planes went overhead and recorded, it was like, oh, that's so fun to see. It's not so fun to see when those MiGs and other jets are flying overhead and really dropping bombs on you.
Yeah, and Ellington Field is one of 2 places in the United States where we operate international assassin drones.
Yeah, because my brother was.
Las Vegas and Ellington Field.
My brother was stationed there.
Nobody
told me that.
Average age of somebody flying a militarized drone is about 20. So it's interesting to think about that.
Yeah, it's
Right.
like right there. It's over
And we
our
don't have
airspace.
drones in our airspace that are weaponized, right? Because we protect our airspace. But if you live in particular countries, like, you sometimes see these things and like they shoot people and they fly away. And like, that's what your life is like. And probably you've been around too, like if you've been to Chicago, right? There's areas where there's just police all the time. I don't live in that neighborhood. Like I know where the police are. They're at the apartments. They're not. And it's true. The police are 92% of their time is at the 4 apartment complexes in this neighborhood. And the other 8%, they follow the school bus around and ticket people who speed. So it's like a different reality, right? Like, so what's it like to grow up like that? Well, I don't know, but it's wrong. Like, this is an interesting thing, right? Yeah, and then the other question is like, what power do you even have over that situation in the Middle East? I mean, you have none other than like you can imbibe more hatred towards people or not, right? Or you could try to cultivate relationships with people who you're, you're predisposed to not like. I mean, my friend, the imam in the neighborhood is Palestinian, right? He is Palestinian and moved to Jordan and then came here and is an imam. And like, he's also not Christian, he's Muslim, and like, he's a lovely human being.
But isn't he a nice guy? That's why it's like, it's still nice people. Still agree, they got hurt.
Yeah, like he made scones for my family. Just because he wanted to, right? And that's silly, like that's one thing, and it's a very lovely human thing, right? And if we don't allow that to happen, or if we don't see it or hear it, then it's really easy to do this whole judgment thing where some people are scum. I mean, Paul sort of says we're the scum, but like that's because we're serving you. Like we're choosing to do this for you. I mean, it's just an interesting perspective. And how you soften somebody's heart so you can have a conversation, I don't know the answer to that. Sometimes it is food. No, it is. Like there's these interesting tricks, like eating at somebody's home. We all kind of understand you don't make a scene. Like they got to really push you to make a scene when you're a guest, right? And there's this other really weird stuff about like physical contact with somebody who you have a prejudice against can help disarm your prejudice. If you touch somebody, and the longer the better, like it takes about 40 seconds for oxytocin, and the more surface area the better. So instead of holding their hand like this, if you laced your fingers with them, it's more likely that your brain would rewire itself to have compassion for somebody you're predisposed not to like based on their appearance, ethnicity, or gender. I'm not sure I like you. Can I hold your hand for like just a minute? That'd be interesting, wouldn't it?
But you know what always happens with Shaw and Lord of the Streets, there's always a couple of guys that always, she's so nice to them, they just want to touch her.
Yeah,
and
there's
hold
this.
her hand just because she hasn't tried to pour the coffee from 4 feet away and push it toward them.
Yeah.
And she just genuinely makes them feel like they've come to her home for their Sunday breakfast.
And it's like a little bit heartbreaking that when you choose to show somebody who does not regularly get human dignity, a little human dignity, they mistake it as intimacy because they don't get any of that.
Yeah, that's what I worry about when I'm not trying.
Yeah. And there's a point where you can say like, look, this is about dignity. It's not about intimacy. So like, I just want to be clear about that. But that it can be really hard. Ministry with people who are incarcerated or who have diagnosable DSM-5 mental illness. I mean, I actually hate that term, but because it's so loaded. Like, oh, it's because you're sick. Well, like I have a diagnosable mental illness that shows up in that one, and but I don't perceive myself to be mentally ill, right? Because that's such a loaded statement, right? Like mentally ill people are sick. I don't think I'm sick. Like I have major depressive disorder. Like I doesn't feel like I'm sick. It's sad sometimes, right? But this is a thing, and this is what community living's like. And this happens in this community because I have people here who have sort of these diagnosable things. And when people are really sweet and listen, they can sometimes say, there must be some intimacy there. And the answer is no, that was just really compassionate. Like I care about you, but I don't want intimacy beyond that.
Right.
And trying to figure that out can be really tricky. I mean, I don't think this is like long ago and far away. Like I think we're here.
It's now.
Yeah, I was reading this and he talks about like the guy talks about under rowers or stewards, right? And like I can tell you there's this whole class of under rowers here called the Altar Guild. Because you don't even know who's on the Altar Guild. They don't stand it publicly. They don't do anything on a Sunday morning. They come here on Saturday for like an hour and a half, and they sweep and they vacuum and they iron the linens. And a lot of people don't even know or care that they do that, but it means a lot to them that everything is straight and looks the way it's supposed to and picked up. And like, that's a group of under rowers, that's a group of people that just do the work, and it means a lot to them.
But if they don't do their work, it will be felt all the way. up to the
We'd
top.
probably notice it was all wrongfully. Yeah, we'd notice. Yeah.
But then they do it gladly. They're not on Sunday. Come on, let's make sure we acknowledge Renata.
Yeah. I mean,
Sorry,
sometimes-
but they're on the altar guild today because they don't need that. And then there's some people who, you know, I worked on the altar guild Saturday. They didn't even say anything about it on Sunday. Is that,
That's
did you
not
do
at
it so
this
that they would
church.
talk to you? Yeah, not at this church. We can name some people that need it, but they don't need that. I did this and then I need everybody to know that I did it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think if it gets, because we're talking about altar guild, there's a few people I know who like, that's their piety. It's deeply moving to them to iron the linens. Like it moves them.
Yeah.
That would not move me at all. I would be thinking, how do I get this done as quickly as I can? And I'm no good at this. What do I do? Right? That's what I would be thinking. And I also know that there's people who do it as their own piety, but like recognition's a human need. So to say that like, hey, just do your job without recognition. Nope. Like recognition is really, really important. And so like our vestry, one of their jobs is to write a thank you note to somebody in the parish every month, like 12 a year. So the goal is that we're gonna just randomly pick somebody and say, I noticed you did that thing, and I really appreciate that you did that thing. And I don't know that everybody gets a note. I don't know. And some people might get 12 notes a year, and some people don't get any. I don't know the answer to that because we don't say, I'm writing my note to so-and-so. No, you pick somebody else. But like this idea of recognition is really important. And I'll tell you, for all the things I don't do well, I think the first year I got here, people gave their pledges. That's right when I got here. And I wrote a thank you note. And somebody said, it's the first time the priest has ever given me a thank you note. And I know people don't need it, but it's also nice, right? And we had a vestry retreat at my house, and somebody said, in 50 years, it's the first time I've been to the priest's house. Well, that seems sad to me, you know, like that seems sad because like you invite people to your house, like, so I can't invite you to my, now, like if I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, it would make less sense, but I don't. Like I live in a house and I can do this, and my spouse doesn't like to be there, so she leaves. That's how we work it out.
I'm out of here.
But that recognition is a really interesting thing. I mean, again, like how we do that. My last parish had a rectory. This was in Coronado, and the rectory was worth $2 million, not because it was gold gilded, but because actually it was like a normal house. That was like what homes in San Diego cost, right? And sure, the rector lived there as part of his compensation, and he would have newcomer luncheons at his house. But there were some members that would say, that's our house. And it's just so interesting to say,
Yes.
like, but it's not your house,
It's
right?
not,
Like,
yeah.
it's not yours.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
can't go there when you want
Yeah,
to. Like, that's where he
exactly. Yeah, you
lives,
can
right?
stay
So,
here.
like, how we view this stuff is like kind of important.
Yeah.
I often get a call that says, I know it's your day off, but so you know it's my day off. You recognize that you know it is, and you've still chosen to call me about a thing you could have called me about yesterday, you just forgot.
Mhm. Well, you can wait till tomorrow.
I'm not complaining about my people. We all do that. We all do that. I call clergy on their day off because I don't always track when it is, right? And you know, because that's when I thought to do it. I think that can be okay. That can be innocuous and innocent, and it can also end up my time's more important than yours. What costs of discipleship have you encountered? That's the last question.
This goes way back, but thinking I was a goody two shoes because I went to Bible study instead of something else. I didn't get invited to something.
Hmm. Like
couldn't
sort of
tell.
like denial or missing out was a red badge of courage kind of
Mhm.
thing, or the other way around.
No, it was, no, that's just that, Well, we didn't invite you because you go to Bible study.
Okay.
Just, finding out about something after the fact, I'm like, oh, okay. I was much more upset at the time, but now I can say that.
Yeah.
Because, it was as a teenager. So, that's the only thing I can think of. But
Well, I think, and probably for me, my family, my parents, and even some of my stepkids are not as faith oriented. And some aren't at all. And they admit it. I mean, I'm not in my, doesn't matter, but, sometimes when I comment, I can't go to church on Sunday, you get that little roll of the eye.
Mm.
Doesn't bother me, kids. But you see that, and I'll say, you ever thought about it? You ever thought about, go to your own church, but you ever thought about just thinking about it, hearing the other side? And, it's not always the most positive response. When you're trying to encourage.
Yeah, I mean, missing out is a thing. Missing out's a thing.
Yeah.
I have a spouse that doesn't attend services, and so she works Monday through Friday, and I work weekends. And holidays we don't have, because I do holidays here. I don't know if that's discipleship. Maybe that's just the job I've chosen to take. I don't know. But I also think you all are saying there's sometimes a little bit of social bits, right? I actually am kind of reluctant to tell people what I do not because I'm embarrassed, because I'm wary of the projection I'm going to get.
Yeah, they'll be judging.
Because that shows up, right? Like even just the other day, I was visiting somebody who's just as sweet as she can be. She's super sweet. She's 98, getting ready to be 99. And I was wearing my short sleeves, and I was visiting her over in her room at the assisted living place. And she just kind of looked me up and down. And that's somebody I know. I've seen her a bunch of times, and it's not the first time I've worn short sleeves. And she said, "You had a rough life early on, didn't you?" Not really. I mean, because I didn't. I didn't. I had a pretty straight-laced life. Still do. It's just sort of this interesting disconnect, right? There's no real cost to that, I guess. It's just a little odd. I've had people tell me, somebody in the park, I did a pet blessing 2 years ago, and then he wanted to tell me how Episcopalians didn't really believe in God or study the Bible because I don't know what it was. And I was like, look, man, just don't come to church with me. I'm glad you're good, right? But I got other things to do right now, I don't. Or I had people come evangelize me. They're like, "If you died today, do you know you go to heaven?" I'm like, "Hey friend, I'm an Episcopal priest." "Yeah, but not Episcopalians, It's like, wow, you're on my porch. Go away. This is my home. I don't know you. Yeah, so that's weird. I mean, I didn't think most of us in general, I didn't know that cost is an interesting thing, right? In Saudi Arabia, the cost is you die. You can have your hands or your head cut off, or your parents can disown you. Probably not our reality here, but there is pain to people, frankly, to being lumped into a group of folks that have a negative affiliation with them, right? When people find I'm a pastor, and that's what they love to call me, a pastor. I'm not a pastor, I'm a priest. Okay, pastor. Well, isn't this so wrong? All these people that are pro-choice. Oh, you mean people who are pro women's rights? No, I think that's actually a good thing to be pro women's rights. But this is an interesting thing that people will put you in compartments
Mm.
based on the word Christian or church or priest or pastor.
Well, you know, and I told you, the day after my, husband's service here. My son came up to me that morning, and, you know, we're all, and it was church that morning, because it was Saturday. And he said, Mom, you know, if I just had a little more religion, I had never heard anybody that I truly would go to church. Because he just thought the world of, well, not,
Oh.
not the world of you, but now he said, you know, if I went to church, and even if I had an inkling, I'd be going to hear him. He was amazing.
That's exactly the reaction that I got from a friend of mine's grandson after my husband's service in seeing Mike. And he said, I've never been so impressed with somebody in my life. This kid was in college, you know, college kid. And you know what it was? It was the ink. He loved that. He just said, wow, he's a priest and he's got tattoos and he loved it. But his dad is also fully covered and he's had a lot of pushback from his friends because of the way his dad looks.
Mhm.
And when he saw you, it was just like, oh my God, this is so amazing.
It's interesting, right? Because actually the majority of our parish doesn't have that and probably doesn't want it for their grandkids. And this is where it's lovely. We get along. I find that very helpful. And maybe that's part of like we don't even have to all agree that something is beneficial for us to still be in community with each other. It's easier with something like this, because at the end of the day, this doesn't like, I don't know, affect your own liberties. I don't know. It's obviously a lot harder when we start talking about what do we do about which folks to include and which ones not. I mean, I guess actually if we looked at it simply, it's pretty simple. Like it doesn't affect you to love somebody else. Like that's not a challenge to you to love somebody who's different from you, but we just seem to forget that. I don't know. The last question the author asks us is, to what extent is the imitation of Christ appropriate or possible, right? And like the way I grew up is it's not possible, but you have to do your best. Like you can't be perfect like Jesus, but that's no excuse either. But I don't know, like, I guess it depends how we read it. Cause like, I mean, I kind of think that Jesus called that lady a female dog and she said, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs. And he was like, oh, you're right. They do. Like, I'll help you out. Right. So like, maybe we could imitate Jesus if we like paid attention and learned from our mistakes. Like that seems good. Maybe the scary thing is when we like refuse to learn from our mistakes or pay attention. I don't know, like maybe we get it wrong when we think imitation of Christ means be exactly the guy instead of like the qualities are, okay, like I'm going to try to hold my heart softer and not, you know, be deadlocked and firm. Like, and if I make a mistake, I'll apologize or I'll reorient, you know, like I don't have to double down on something just because that's how it's been. I mean, that's ultimately seems like what the whole chapter is pushing. Paul's trying to push him is like, guys, like I'm doing it different from you, and that's not less than.
Just different.
This is different. Yeah. Well, it's about to get real juicy. It's going to get juicy. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to get juicy the next couple of weeks. Because next